Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the chosen protector of Atlantis in Aquaman's place. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had gone silent. Not in the literal sense. Musutifa was, as always, a symphony of urban life. The rumble of the elevated train, the distant wail of a hero's siren, the cacophony of 1,000 conversations bleeding out from shops and cafes, it was all there. But for Izuku Midoriya, it was noise without meaning, a soundtrack to a film he was no longer a part of. The sounds passed through him, as insubstantial as his dreams. All Might's words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic. Realistic. Izuku's hands, white-knuckled, clutched the straps of his yellow backpack. Each step he took on the cracked pavement felt heavy, as if his feet were sinking into wet cement. He had climbed all those stairs, poured out his soul to his idol, clung to the last, desperate ember of a 15-year-old dream, only to have it snuffed out not with malice, but with pity. A kind, gentle, soul-crushing pity. Without a quirk, it's just not possible. He absently traced the scorched edges of the cover of his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. All Might's signature, bold and bombastic, was a cruel joke now. A signature on a death certificate. The death of Deku, the aspiring hero. All that was left was Izuku, the quirkless, the useless. The one who had to be saved, never the one who saves. He took a shortcut through a familiar underpass, the cool, damp air doing nothing to soothe the fire of shame in his cheeks. He remembered Bakugo's words from earlier that day, spat with the casual cruelty of a lifetime of superiority. If you want to be a hero so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The thought, which he dismissed with a terrified shudder hours ago, now slithered into his mind with a chilling sort of logic. He shook his head, a violent, full-body tremor. No. He couldn't think like that. His mom, he couldn't do that to her. He was so lost in the swirling gray fog of his misery that the explosion barely registered at first. It was a deep, guttural boom that vibrated through the soles of his worn red sneakers. It was followed by the sound of shattering glass and panic screams. Normally, this would be his cue. He would be running towards the danger, notebook already in hand, his mind a frantic buzz of analysis and all. He'd be muttering about quirk applications and support gear limitations, a fanba in his natural habitat. But today, his legs felt rooted to the spot. What was the point? It was just another reminder of the world he wasn't allowed to join. It was a party he could only watch through a soundproof window. Yet, habit was a powerful thing. Years of instinct warred with his newfound despair, and instinct won. His feet began to move, slowly at first, then with more purpose. He emerged from the underpass into a street choked with people and smoke. A villain attack. Of course, the scene was a familiar brand of chaos. A grotesque, amorphous creature made of viscous green sludge had taken over a narrow alleyway, its fluid body lashing out, causing small fires to erupt where it slammed into signs and electrical boxes. The pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were struggling. Kamui Woods was trying to corral the villain, but his wooden limbs sank uselessly into the sludge. I can't get a grip on him, he yelled, frustration etched on his wooden face. Death Arms was busy evacuating civilians, his powerful arms, which could stop a speeding bus, rendered ineffective against an opponent he couldn't punch. An empty lady, the towering newcomer, couldn't even fit into the cramped street. My gigantification is useless here. I'd bring the whole block down. Izuku watched, his analytical mind kicking in despite himself. The villain's body is fluid, making him immune to blunt force and capture by conventional means. Fire seems to agitate him, but he can also smother flames. The heroes on the scene have quirks that are poorly matched for this situation. They need someone with a quirk that can control liquids, or perhaps freeze him, or even dehydrate him. The thought died in his throat, a bitter pill. He was a spectator. A useless, muttering spectator. He was about to turn away, to go home and finally accept the crushing weight of his reality, when he saw it. Through a momentary gap in the swirling sludge, he saw a flash of spiky blonde hair and a pair of furious, terrified red eyes. Kaken. The world, which had been silent and gray, snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. Bakugo was trapped. He was the hostage. The sludge villain was wearing him like a suit of armor, and Bakugo's own explosions were erupting indiscriminately, making it impossible for the heroes to get close. He was thrashing, fighting, screaming silent curses, but he was losing. The sludge was creeping higher, covering his mouth and nose. He was suffocating. Izuku's blood ran cold. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. It wasn't the usual rage or arrogance. It was raw primal fear. The look of someone who knew they were going to die, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not All Might's words. Not his own quirkless status. Not the jeers and the pity and the 15 years of being told he was less than everyone else. All of that was stripped away, burned to ash by the sight of someone in mortal danger. His legs moved. He didn't know why. He didn't have a plan. He had no quirk, no power, nothing but a yellow backpack and a heart that was beating like a drum in a hurricane. The heroes shouted at him. "Hey, kid! Stop! It's too dangerous!" He didn't hear them. The world narrowed to a single, desperate objective: buy time. Just a few seconds. Maybe if he could distract the villain, maybe if he could clear some of the sludge from Bakugo's face, a hero with a better quirk would arrive. It was a stupid, suicidal, utterly foolish idea. It was the most heroic thing he had ever done. "What the hell are you doing, Deku?" Bakugo's muffled scream reached him. Izuku swung his backpack off his shoulders and hurled it at the villain's face. It struck one of the creature's giant, yellow eyes with a wet smack. The villain roared in pain and surprise, its form wavering for a split second. "It's you!" The villain gurgled, its voice like mud bubbling. "The brat from before." Izuku didn't stop. He clawed at the sludge, his fingers sinking into the disgusting, semi-solid goo. It was like trying to dig through thick, cold tar. It smelled of sewage and rot. "Kaken!" he screamed, his voice raw. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." For a fleeting second, he saw surprise in Bakugo's eyes, a flicker of something other than anger. And then the villain reformed, its rage focused entirely on the insignificant gnat trying to free its prize. "You want to play hero?" it snarled. "Then die like one." The sludge slammed into him. It was a physical blow, a tidal wave of filth that knocked the air from his lungs. It enveloped him, pouring into his mouth, his nose, his ears. The world became a suffocating, green-black prison. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight from all sides, like being 1,000 feet beneath the ocean. His lungs burned. His chest felt like it was going to implode. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He was drowning. Not in water, but in something far worse. His limbs felt heavy, his frantic struggles growing weaker. Black spots danced in his vision. So this is it, a distant part of his mind thought. A swan dive after all. But then, something shifted. As the pressure reached its peak, as the last of his oxygen was screaming to be released, something deep within him, something dormant and ancient, answered the call of his desperation. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, older than quirks, older than mankind. He felt a pull. A strange, resonant hum that started in his gut and spread through his veins. It was a connection to the liquid that surrounded him, the very substance that was killing him. He could feel it. He could feel the semi-aqueous composition of the villain's body, the moisture content, the viscosity. And in his panic, in his desperate, dying wish to breathe, he pulled back. He didn't know how. He just did. He pulled with every fiber of his being, not with his muscles, but with that new, strange sense. The sludge villain screamed, a high-pitched, gurgling shriek of agony and confusion. Its body, which had been a solid, crushing mass around Izuku, began to lose its cohesion. It felt thinner. Parts of it were being drawn away from him, as if responding to a powerful, localized tide. Izuku gasped, managing to steal a precious, sludge-filled breath. The pressure lessened. He could move his arms again. He felt another pull, this one from outside the villain. He could sense it, a large, pressurized reservoir of clean, pure water just a few feet away. A fire hydrant. Without thinking, he yanked at that feeling, too. There was a deafening crack of metal. The fire hydrant on the corner of the street exploded, not in a simple spray, but in a focused, powerful torrent. The water didn't just shoot upwards. It curved, it snaked through the air with an unnatural purpose, a shimmering blue serpent homing in on the sludge villain. It slammed into the villain with the force of a cannonball. The creature shrieked as the massive influx of water destabilized its form, diluting it, washing it away from Bakugo and Izuku. At the same time, Izuku felt something else. A whisper. It wasn't a sound that entered through his ears. It was a feeling, a vibration that resonated in his bones. It was a chorus of a million faint, distant voices, unintelligible but filled with a sense of immense scale and ageless depth. It was the call of the ocean, a symphony of the abyss, and for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, he felt like he was a part of it. He felt the pull of the tides, the crushing cold of the deep, the silent song of leviathans. He was so lost in the sensory overload, the burning lungs, the roaring water, the whispers in his soul, that he barely registered the shadow that fell over him. I really am pathetic. The voice was deep, familiar, and filled with a weary power. Izuku looked up, his vision blurred, to see the towering, muscular form of All Might. The hero's smile was gone, replaced by a grimace of self-recrimination. I should have followed my own advice, All Might boomed, his hand reaching back. A pro should always be ready to risk their life. With a final, desperate push, Izuku shoved himself away from Bakugo, creating a clear line of sight. Texas smash! The punch didn't even connect. The sheer force of the wind pressure it generated was enough. The air itself became a weapon. The already destabilized sludge villain was blasted apart, splattering against the alley walls in 1,000 green droplets. And then, the sky opened up. The change in air pressure from All Might's punch caused the clouds to condense and release their burden. Rain began to fall, thick and heavy, washing the street clean. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, broken only by the patter of the rain. The crowd stared. The heroes stared. Bakugo, on his hands and knees, coughed up sludge and gasped for air, staring at his own trembling hands. But All Might was staring at Izuku. The boy was a mess. Soaked to the bone, covered in filth, shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. But that wasn't what held the number one hero's attention. He had seen the kid run in. He had seen the suicidal, reckless heroism. But he had also seen the rest. He had seen the sludge villain's form inexplicably weaken. He had seen the fire hydrant burst not in a random spray, but in a focused, aimed jet of water. It looked, for all the world, like the desperate, chaotic awakening of an incredibly powerful water-based quirk. All Might's mind raced. The boy said he was quirkless. The doctor's diagnosis, could they have been wrong? A late bloomer? A quirk that only activates under extreme duress? He looked at the boy, truly looked at him, and saw past the trembling, terrified exterior to the spirit within. The spirit that had moved him just an hour ago on that rooftop. The spirit of a true hero. Far beneath the waves, in a place untouched by sunlight, the world was not silent. It was a place of muted pressure, of bioluminescent wonder, and of ancient, vigilant technology. In the heart of the city of Atlantis, within the royal citadel, stood the chamber of the Heartstone. The chamber was circular, carved from obsidian and veined with glowing blue lapis. In its center, floating in a column of swirling, energized water, was a crystalline sphere the size of a man's head. For decades, the Heartstone had been dormant, its internal light a soft, placid glow, a quiet memorial to a lost queen and her surface-born child. It was tasked with a single purpose, to resonate with the unique biosignature of King Atlan's royal bloodline. The keeper of the stone, an old, wizened Atlantean named Corum, had tended to the chamber for 60 years. His job was one of tradition and memory, not of action. Nothing ever happened, until today. Without warning, the Heartstone pulsed. A single, brilliant flash of aquamarine light that banished the shadows from the chamber. Corum, who had been dozing on a stone bench, was instantly on his feet, his 3 hearts pounding in his chest. By the ancients! He breathed, his webbed hands clutching his ceremonial trident. The stone pulsed again, stronger this time. The soft hum of the chamber rose to a deafening thrum. The water in the containment column began to churn violently. A third pulse, and the light that erupted from the heartstone was no longer just a glow. It was a beam, a spear of pure energy that shot upwards, striking the domed ceiling and causing the entire citadel to vibrate. Alarms, silent for a generation, blared to life throughout the city. Royal guards, clad in silvery armor, stormed into the chamber, their tridents leveled. "Keeper Coram! What is happening?" the captain demanded, his voice amplified by his helmet. Coram couldn't speak. He could only point a trembling finger at the heartstone, which was now glowing with the intensity of a small sun. Its light was a beacon, a declaration. It is the Queen's signature," Coram stammered, tears welling in his large, black eyes. "The blood of Atlanta. But the energy, it is overwhelming. Uncontrolled. Wild. As if a new power has been born." The captain's eyes widened in understanding. "The firstborn," he whispered, a name that was only ever spoken in hushed, treasonous tones. "The half-breed prince. He is alive," Coram said, a note of awe in his voice. "And his power has awakened. A signal so strong, it is as if the ocean itself is screaming his name." The captain straightened, his duty overriding his shock. He activated his comms unit. "To the throne room. Inform King Orm immediately. The surface dweller has been found." The scolding from the pro-heroes was a predictable blur. "Reckless. Suicidal. You could have gotten yourself killed, kid." Izuku just nodded, his head bowed, the words washing over him. He was too numb, too confused to feel the sting. He caught a glimpse of Bakugo being praised for his resilience, the blonde's expression a thunderous mixture of fury, humiliation, and something else Izuku couldn't quite decipher. Their eyes met for a moment across the crowd. "Deku," Bakugo mouthed, his voice lost in the noise. There was no heat in it. Just a cold, sharp confusion. Izuku turned and walked away before anyone else could stop him. The walk home was a dream. The world was back to being muted and gray, but for a different reason now. Before, it had been the silence of despair. Now, it was the silence of utter bewilderment. What happened back there? He flexed his hands, staring at them as if they belonged to a stranger. He had been quirkless his entire life. The extra joint in his pinky toe was the biological proof. The doctor had said it. The world had said it. He had believed it. So what was that? Was it a quirk? A ridiculously late awakening? It had to be. There was no other explanation. The way the sludge seemed to pull away, the impossible way the water from the hydrant had moved, it wasn't normal. But it hadn't felt like the quirks he had spent his life analyzing. It didn't feel like a part of his body, like an extension of himself. It felt external, like he had reached out and touched something that had always been there, a vast, powerful network just beneath the surface of reality. And for a moment, it had responded. And those whispers? He shuddered, pulling his damp jacket tighter around himself. He finally reached his apartment building, the familiar green door a small anchor in the storm of his thoughts. He let himself in quietly. "Izuku? Oh, Izuku!" His mother, Inko, rushed to him, her face a mask of worry. "I saw the news. The villain attack in our district. I was so worried. You're soaked. And you're filthy. What happened?" "I'm okay, Mom," he mumbled, the lie tasting like ash. "Just got caught in the rain." He couldn't tell her. How could he? "Hey Mom, I think I might have a quirk that lets me talk to the ocean, and it activated while I was being suffocated to death by a sludge monster." She fussed over him, drawing a hot bath and laying out a fresh change of clothes. He went through the motions, the hot water doing little to warm the chill deep in his bones. He sat at his desk in his all-might pajamas, staring at the walls of his hero-worshipping shrine. The posters and figurines felt like relics from another person's life. His gaze fell on a glass of water sitting on his desk. He reached for it, his hand trembling slightly. He stared at his reflection in the clear liquid, at the face of a boy he no longer recognized. He focused. He tried to summon that feeling again, that strange sense of connection, the pull he had felt in the alley. He stared at the water, concentrating with all his might, his brow furrowed. Nothing. The water remained perfectly still. He slumped back in his chair with a sigh, a wave of disappointment washing over him. Maybe it was a fluke. A one-time hysterical reaction. Maybe the pressure on his brain from the suffocation had caused the hallucination. Maybe All Might had done it all, and he had just imagined the rest. That was more likely, wasn't it? More realistic. He let his mind go blank, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. He stared absently at the glass, not trying to do anything, just letting his thoughts drift. He remembered the feeling of the whispers, the sense of a vast, deep, cold presence. The water in the glass trembled. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible vibration at first. Then, a small ripple formed on the surface, circling outwards from the center. The surface of the water domed slightly, rising a millimeter above the lip of the glass, held there by a force he could feel but not comprehend. Izuku's breath hitched. His eyes widened. It was real. It was real. He stared, mesmerized and terrified, at the small miracle happening on his desk. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know what he was. But in that moment, one thing was clear. His life, the small, predictable, quirkless life of Izuku Midoriya, was over. Outside, the gentle rain that had been falling since All Might's punch began to change. The patter against the window grew louder, more frantic. The wind began to howl, rattling the window frame. The sky, which had been a placid gray, darkened to a bruised, turbulent purple. It was a sudden, unnatural storm, a tempest that seemed to spring from nowhere, focusing its energy on their small apartment complex. Knock. 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 The sound, sharp and insistent, cut through the noise of the storm. Izuku jumped, startled. Who would be out in this? I'll get it! Inko called from the living room. He heard the click of the front door opening, followed by his mother's small, surprised gasp. The roar of the wind and rain intensified for a moment. Can I help you? Inko's voice was hesitant. A new voice answered, a woman's. It was calm and clear, yet it carried an authority that seemed to cut through the gale itself. My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Mera. I am looking for your son. Izuku stood up from his desk, a strange sense of dread and inevitability washing over him. He walked slowly to the doorway of his room and peered into the entryway. Standing on their doorstep was a woman who did not belong in Yuzurifu. She was tall and regal, with hair the color of cascading crimson, so vibrant it seemed to glow even in the dim light of the hallway. Her eyes were a piercing, otherworldly shade of aquamarine, and her features were sharp and beautiful, like a sculpture carved by the tides. She wore strange, form-fitting green armor that shimmered with a faint, scale-like pattern, and despite the torrential downpour, she was not drenched, but merely glistened, as if the water itself was reluctant to cling to her. She looked past Inko, her gaze locking onto Izuku. In her eyes he saw the depth of the ocean, the fury of a hurricane, and an urgent, desperate hope. Izuku Midoriya? She said, and her voice was the sound of waves breaking on a distant shore. I have come a very long way to find you. Your world, and mine, are in grave danger. The storm outside was a physical manifestation of the chaos that had just been unleashed inside Izuku Midoriya's head. The wind howled a mournful, angry song, and rain lashed against the windowpanes like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the sea, a scent that had walked in with the impossible woman standing in their genkan. Inko Midoriya, clutching the edge of the door, managed to find her voice. It was a small, trembling thing, easily swallowed by the gale. I am sorry, are you from a hero agency? Is Izuku in some kind of trouble because of the villain attack? Her mind, a mother's mind, had immediately jumped to the most logical, albeit terrifying, conclusion. The woman named Mera paid her little mind. Her aquamarine eyes, sharp as sea glass, were fixed on Izuku. She took a step inside, the doors swinging shut behind her with a definitive thud, cutting off the worst of the storm's roar. Water dripped from her crimson hair and shimmering green armor, pooling on the welcome mat not as random droplets, but as perfect, cohesive spheres that rolled and merged like living mercury. Trouble has found him, yes, Mera said, her voice a low, melodic contralto that resonated with an ancient power. But I am not from any of your surface world agencies. I am from his world. Izuku's brain, which had short-circuited the moment he saw the water on his desk move, was frantically trying to reboot. The swirling vortex of confusion, fear, and a bizarre, academic curiosity was making him dizzy. My world! He squeaked, his voice cracking. I live here. In Muzutafu. Mara's expression was one of profound impatience, the look of a scholar forced to explain basic arithmetic to a stubborn child. That is where you have existed. It is not where you are from. You are Izuku, firstborn son of Atlanta, the rightful queen of Atlantis. The silence that followed was absolute. The storm, the dripping water, the frantic beating of Izuku's own heart, it all faded away. The words hung in the air, so ludicrous, so utterly disconnected from reality that Izuku's first, overwhelming instinct was to laugh. Atlantis? He stammered, a hysterical giggle bubbling in his throat. Like the myth? Under the sea? Is this a prank show? Are there hidden cameras? He glanced wildly around the small, cluttered apartment, half expecting a television crew to jump out from behind the shoe rack. Mara's jaw tightened. I assure you, the fate of the planet is no prank. She raised a hand, palm open. The spheres of water on the mat lifted into the air, coalescing into a single, shimmering orb of water that hovered between them. Inside it, the light from the hallway lamp refracted into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Your mother fled to the surface decades ago, escaping a political marriage that would have been a cage. She found sanctuary here. She found love. And she had a son. A child of two worlds. You. Inko made a small, wounded sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Atlanta. She whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. Izuku's mind was racing, trying to process the impossible data stream. Atlantis. Queen. Sun. Two worlds. Hydrokinesis. The pieces were all there, insane as they were, and they were beginning to form a terrifying picture. His quirk awakening, the whispers, his lifelong, inexplicable fascination with water. My father, Izuku said, the words catching in his throat. Hisashi Midoriya. He works overseas. It was the story he'd been told his whole life, a simple, sad story of a parent whose work kept him away. It was Inko who answered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a dawning, 30-year-old realization. Hisashi, oh Hisashi. She looked from Mara to Izuku, her face pale as parchment. He wasn't in international finance, Izuku. He was a marine biologist. A researcher. He worked at a small, remote oceanic institute near the coast. That's where I met him. She took a shaky step forward, her hand resting on the wall for support. He was the kindest man I ever knew. But he was different. He always used to say the sea was his true home, that he felt like he was just a visitor here on the land. He called the rhythm of the tides his heartbeat. I always thought he was just being poetic. Her eyes filled with tears, a flood of memories and half-understood truths suddenly crashing down on her. The day he left, he told me he had to go home. That his world needed him. He gave me a kiss and he walked into the ocean. He just walked into the water until I couldn't see him anymore. He promised he would come back for us. He never did. The story, a simple tale of parental abandonment, was suddenly recast in a new, epic light. It wasn't that his father had left them. It was that he had gone home. He returned to Atlantis to plead for Queen Atlanta's peaceful union with the surface, Mara supplied, her voice softening with a sliver of sympathy as she watched Inko. He was a good man. For his efforts, he was executed for treason by the new king. The word executed struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The abstract father, the man he barely remembered, was suddenly real, and just as suddenly, he was gone forever, murdered for trying to do the right thing. The weight of it all, the revelation of his heritage, the truth about his father, the crushing reality of this strange woman's story, was too much for Inko. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and her knees buckled. Mom! Izuku yelled, lunging forward to catch her. He was just a second too late, but before she could hit the floor, a cushion of water, pulled from the very air, materialized beneath her, softening her fall. Izuku knelt beside her, checking her breathing, his mind a maelstrom of panic and grief. He looked up at Mara, his eyes blazing with a desperate, fearful anger. What do you want from me? What I want is irrelevant, Mara stated, her regal composure returning. She knelt, her movements fluid and precise. It is what your world needs. Your mother, Atlanta, was eventually forced back to Atlantis. She gave birth to a second son, a pure-blooded Atlantean named Orem. He now sits on the throne. And he has declared war. Izuku stared at her, uncomprehending. War? With who? With you, Mara said, her gaze sweeping around the small apartment, a gesture that encompassed everything beyond its walls. With the surface world. He calls you the air breathers. For centuries we have hidden, watching as you poisoned our waters, slaughtered our creatures, and fractured the very bedrock of the planet with your industry and your weapons. ORM has had enough. He is using this pollution as a pretext to unite the 7 underwater kingdoms of the sea. He is building an army, the likes of which your world has never seen. When he attacks, your coastal cities will be washed away by tidal waves. Your navies will be crushed. Your lands will be drowned. The scale of it was incomprehensible. It was the plot of a disaster movie, not a conversation happening in his cramped apartment hallway. Why are you telling me this? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because you are the firstborn son of Queen Atlanta, Mara said, her voice ringing with conviction. By the laws of our people, the throne is yours by right. ORM's claim is weaker than yours. You are the only one who can stand against him, challenge him for the throne, and bridge the gap between our 2 worlds. She leaned closer, her aquamarine eyes boring into his. I need you to come with me to Atlantis. I need you to take your rightful place as king. King. The word was so foreign, so absurd, it was like she had asked him to become the moon. Him. Izuku Midoriya. Deku. The quirkless weakling who couldn't even talk to a girl without turning into a blushing, stuttering mess. A king? His panic, which had been a churning sea in his gut, finally found its outlet. It was the only way he knew how to cope, the one mechanism that had never failed him. Analysis. He scrambled to his feet, ran to his room, and grabbed the first clean notebook and pen he could find. He stumbled back out, flipping it open to a fresh page. Okay, he began muttering, the words spilling out of him in a torrent, his pen scratching furiously across the paper. So Atlantis is real. And I'm a prince. Logically, that means my recent hydrokinetic manifestation wasn't a quirk but a biological trait of my Atlantean heritage. But what are the limits? Can all Atlanteans do this? Or is it specific to the royal bloodline? And physiology. You mentioned my father was executed. Does that mean Atlanteans are vulnerable to the same physical trauma as humans? Or are you more durable? The pressure at the bottom of the ocean is immense, so your cellular structure must be incredibly dense. What's the mechanism for oxygen extraction? Is it a form of gill? A separate respiratory system? Does it filter H2O and— What are you doing? Mara interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. Izuku looked up from his frantic scribbling, his eyes wide and unfocused. I'm taking notes? If I'm going to challenge for a throne, I need data. You mentioned 7 kingdoms. What are they? What are their military strengths? Political alliances? Is Atlantis a direct monarchy or a federal system with vassal states? What are the specific laws of succession? What is ORM's casus belli beyond general pollution? Are there specific recent events he's using to rally support? Stop, Mara commanded, standing up. She looked at him with an expression of profound, crushing disappointment. By the 7 seas. Boko sent me to find a king, a warrior to unite the people. And I find this. A muttering surface child who thinks a war can be won with a notebook. The word stung, striking the same raw nerve that Bakugo had been prodding his entire life. Useless. Nerd. Deku. It's not about winning a war. Izuku shot back, his voice rising with a passion that surprised them both. I don't want to win a war. And I don't want a throne. I don't know anything about being a king. Then you would let your world perish? Mara challenged, taking a step towards him. You would stand by while billions of innocent people are slaughtered by my people, all because you are afraid? No! The word was a raw cry from the depths of his soul. His pen stopped moving. The analytical storm in his mind went silent. Everything came into sharp, simple focus, distilled down to the one principle that had guided his entire life. He looked at her, his eyes clear and steady for the first time since she had arrived. You said people are in danger. You said innocent people will die. Mera blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Yes. Billions of them. Izuku took a deep breath. He closed his notebook. The fear was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his stomach. But something else was there now, too, the same fire that had sent him running toward the sludge villain. The same spirit All Might had seen on that rooftop. It was his core, his truth. Then I'll go, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I'll do it. Not to be a king, but to stop him. To save them. A flicker of respect, of reluctant admiration, sparked in Mera's eyes. She saw it then. Not a king. Not a warrior. But the one thing the surface world called a hero. Before she could respond, the world exploded. The wall of the living room disintegrated in a blast of plaster and splintered wood. A high-pressure jet of water, moving so fast it was almost invisible, sliced through their apartment, carving a trench in the floor and ceiling before blowing out the back window. The storm outside was nothing compared to the violence that had just invaded their home. Through the gaping hole in the wall stood two figures. They were clad in sleek, black and red armor that seemed to be modeled after the predatory forms of mantis shrimp. Their helmets were sealed, with large, glowing red optics that hummed with a low-grade energy. In their hands they held rifles that pulsed with the same ominous light. Atlantean commandos. ORM's elite guard. Target acquired, one of them said, its voice a distorted, gurgling sound, like a transmission from the bottom of the ocean. The half-breed is here. Eliminate him. The woman is a traitor. Show no mercy. Mera moved with a speed that defied belief. In one fluid motion, she was in front of Izuku, her hands outstretched. Get your mother! She yelled. The commandos opened fire. They didn't shoot bullets, but focused lances of water, pressurized to the point where they could cut through steel. Mera didn't flinch. She thrust her hands forward, and the water from the burst pipes in the walls and the rain pouring in through the hole leaped to her command. It formed a shimmering, crystalline shield in front of them, hardening to the density of diamond. The water jets slammed into it, exploding into harmless clouds of steam. Izuku, his heart hammering against his ribs, scrambled over to his unconscious mother. He tried to lift her, his muscles straining. She was too heavy. The building groaned around them, the structural damage from the initial blast compromising its integrity. A second blast ripped through the floor, and the section of the apartment where their neighbor, Mrs. Tanaka, lived, began to buckle. Izuku saw her through the dust and debris, an old woman frozen in terror as a heavy support beam, snapped from its mooring, began to topple towards her. There was no time. No hero was coming. No! Izuku screamed. He reached out a hand, not knowing what he was doing, only knowing he had to do something. He focused on the feeling, the deep, resonant pull he'd felt before. He felt the water in the building's emergency sprinkler system, a network of pipes running through the ceiling. He pulled. With a shriek of protesting metal, a sprinkler head directly above Mrs. Tanaka burst. But it wasn't a spray. It was a thick, solid column of water that slammed into the side of the falling beam. It didn't stop it, but it altered its trajectory. The massive piece of concrete and rebar crashed to the floor a foot to her left, shattering the ground where she had just been standing. The water, its purpose served, collapsed around her, drenching her but leaving her unharmed. Izuku stared at his hand, panting. It had been clumsy, an act of pure, instinctual desperation. But it had worked. Mera glanced back, her eyes wide with surprise. She gave him a sharp, approving nod before turning back to the fight. She was no longer on the defensive. She clapped her hands together, and the water shield atomized, then reformed into dozens of razor-sharp shards of hardened water. With a flick of her wrists, she sent them flying towards the commandos. They were fast, but she was faster. The shards sliced through their armor, causing sparks to fly and their suits to hiss as they depressurized. One of the commandos staggered back, clutching a wound in its shoulder. The other one was smarter. It ignored Mera, its glowing red eyes locking onto the true target. It raised its rifle and fired directly at Izuku and his mother. Mera spun, a curse on her lips, but she wouldn't be fast enough to intercept it. Izuku saw the lance of water coming, a blur of deadly force. He threw his body over his mother's, a pathetic, fleshy shield against a weapon that could shear through a bank vault. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for an impact that would tear him in two. It never came. A deep, resonant thrum filled the air, and a flash of bronze and silver intercepted the blast. Izuku opened his eyes to see Queen Atlantis' coincidental, the five-pronged weapon Mera had been carrying on her back, spinning in the air before him, deflecting the water jet into the ceiling. It flew back into Mera's waiting hand. "That was a mistake," she said, her voice dangerously calm. She moved, a blur of green and crimson. She vaulted over the ruined sofa, using the coincidental not as a piercing weapon, but as a conduit. She slammed its base into a large pool of water on the floor, and a massive wave erupted, lifting one of the commandos off its feet and slamming it through the opposite wall into the building's corridor. The remaining commando, seeing its position was hopeless, activated a device on its wrist. A high-pitched whine filled the air. "What is that?" Izuku yelled over the noise. "A plasma charge. The whole floor is going to collapse. We have to go, now!" Mera yelled. She ran to Izuku, grabbing him with one arm and effortlessly hoisting Inkle over her shoulder with the other. The strength she possessed was staggering. "My neighbors! The other people in the building!" Izuku protested, his mind reeling. "The authorities of your world will help them. My priority is you," Mera replied, her expression grim. "We cannot die here." She didn't wait for an answer. She ran towards the gaping hole in the apartment wall, the wind and rain whipping around them. Izuku looked back one last time at his room, at the All Might posters now tattered and burning, at the life he was leaving behind, reduced to rubble and smoke. The boy who had lived there was gone, destroyed in the blast. "Hold your breath," Mera commanded, and then they jumped. They fell through the stormy night air, the ground rushing up to meet them. Izuku screamed, clutching his mother's unconscious form tighter to Mera. Just before they hit the pavement, Mera twisted in midair. She thrust her free hand towards the ground, and a geyser of water erupted from a storm drain, meeting them, cushioning them, and creating a massive, swirling slide of water that carried them down the street, away from the groaning, collapsing apartment building. They landed in a heap in a flooded intersection, soaked and shivering. Behind them, a bright orange light bloomed as the plasma charge detonated, taking the entire fourth floor of the Midoriya's apartment complex with it. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. "Come on," Mera grunted, pulling him to his feet. "We are not safe on the land. We must get to the sea." Izuku stood, his legs shaking. He looked at his ruined home, at his unconscious mother, at the alien princess holding a royal weapon at his side. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless Fanba. He was a prince, a target, a refugee. And he was running for his life, towards an ocean that was not a place of vacation and wonder, but a kingdom at war, a kingdom that was waiting for a hero, or a king. He didn't know which one he was supposed to be. He only knew he couldn't turn back. The escape was a blur of salt spray and screaming wind. Mera, a living tempest in human form, moved with a purpose that seemed to bend the storm to her will. She half-dragged, half-carried Izuku, who was himself struggling to support his mother's dead weight. The paved streets of Muzurifu gave way to the manicured lawns of a coastal park, and then to the churning, furious chaos of the sea itself. Waves, tall as buildings, crashed against the rocky breakwater, throwing plumes of white foam into the bruised purple sky. For any normal person, the scene was a portrait of nature's wrath, a clear and present danger. For Mera, it was a gateway. "Here!" She yelled over the roar of a collapsing wave. "This way!" She led him not to a boat or a dock, but to a secluded cove where the waves funneled into a churning whirlpool. At its center, something shimmered beneath the surface, a sleek, dark shape that was too organic to be a machine, yet too perfectly symmetrical to be an animal. It looked like a great, metallic manta ray, its surface shifting with faint, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with the storm. "What is that?" Izuku shouted, his teeth chattering from a mixture of cold and terror. "A royal skiff. It's cloaked. Get your mother inside." Mera placed a hand on the water's surface. The churning sea calmed in a perfect circle around them, and the skiff rose silently, breaking the surface with a soft hiss. A section of its back peeled open, revealing a ramp that descended into a dimly lit interior. They scrambled inside, dragging Inko with them. The moment they were clear, the ramp retracted, and the world went silent. The roar of the storm was gone, replaced by a low, resonant hum. Izuku looked around, panting. The interior was Spartan, all smooth, pearlescent curves and glowing blue trim. There was a control pedestal at the front and a recessed alcove at the back. "Put her there," Mera instructed, pointing to the alcove. As Izuku gently laid his mother down, the alcove glowed, and a soft, gel-like substance enveloped her, supporting her in a gentle stasis. "It will keep her stable. She will be safe." Izuku reached out, his fingers brushing against the strange, cool gel. His mother, the only constant in his life, was now caught between two worlds, just as he was. A fresh wave of guilt and fear washed over him. He had brought this chaos into her life. "Ready yourself," Mera said, her hands already moving across the control pedestal, which was not made of buttons or levers, but of what looked like a solid block of crystal that responded to her touch with ripples of light. "Ready for what?" "To go home." With a lurch, the skiff plunged. Izuku stumbled, grabbing a handhold as the craft dove beneath the waves. Through the large, crystalline viewport at the front, he saw the stormy surface world vanish, replaced by the murky, turbulent green of the coastal waters. And then the panic set in. Primal, instinctual, and absolute. He was underwater. Submerged. His lungs screamed in protest, his body's every reflex demanding he hold his breath. He clamped his hands over his mouth, his eyes wide with terror, the burning sensation in his chest already beginning. He was going to drown. After all that, he was going to die just a few hundred feet from the shore. "Breathe, boy," Mera said, her voice calm, not even turning from the controls. "Breathe? Is she insane?" He thought, his vision starting to swim. "Your body knows what to do," she added, a hint of impatience in her tone. "Your father's blood is stronger than your fear. Trust it. Breathe." It was the hardest thing he had ever done. To intentionally flood his lungs with the very thing his brain told him would kill him. But the alternative was to suffocate. Squeezing his eyes shut, he forced his mouth open and took a desperate, shuddering gasp. Water rushed in. It was cold, salty, and utterly alien. He gagged, his body convulsing. But then, something miraculous happened. There was no choking. The burning in his lungs subsided, replaced by a cool, spreading sensation. He felt a strange, tingling filter in the back of his throat, a part of his anatomy he never knew existed, as it began to extract the oxygen directly from the water. The process was bizarre, unnatural, but it was working. He took another breath, then another. It wasn't air, but it was life. He opened his eyes, his terror slowly giving way to a profound, soul-shaking awe. He was breathing underwater. As the skiff descended deeper, leaving the murky coastal shelf behind, the world outside the viewport transformed. The oppressive darkness gave way to a realm of impossible beauty. Sunlight, filtered through 1,000 feet of water, became a cascade of shifting blue and silver rays, illuminating a world Izuku had only ever seen in documentaries, and they had done it no justice. Great forests of kelp, taller than any skyscraper on the surface, swayed in the silent currents. Mountains, their peaks lost in the gloom of the abyss, rose from the seafloor. Trenches, darker and deeper than any canyon, scarred the ocean bed. And there was life. Everywhere. Schools of fish, numbering in the millions, moved as one, their silver scales catching the light like a galaxy of swirling stars. A pod of immense, majestic blue whales drifted past, their ancient, mournful song vibrating through the skiff's hull, a sound Izuku felt in his very bones. Strange, bioluminescent creatures, fantastic tangles of light and gelatinous flesh, pulsed in the darkness of the deeper waters, creating constellations in the abyss. Izuku was glued to the viewport, his mind, the analytical engine that had been running on fear and panic for hours, finally switching gears to pure, unadulterated wonder. Incredible, he muttered, the word forming strangely in his water-filled lungs. The pressure out there must be over 100 atmospheres. The hull of this skiff, what is it made of? A biometallic alloy? And the propulsion is silent. No cavitation. Is it magnetic? Or some kind of biological manipulation of the currents? He watched a small, curious-looking fish with large, expressive eyes swim up to the viewport. It hovered there, its fins ablur, tilting its head as if to get a better look. On instinct, Izuku pressed his hand to the crystal viewport. He didn't think, he just reached out. Not with his hand, but with his mind, with that strange new sense that had flickered to life in the alleyway. He was instantly flooded with a stream of simple, primal sensations from the fish. Bright. Warm. Big. Safe. Curious. What is? No teeth. No threat. It wasn't language. It wasn't words. It was pure feeling, a direct line of communication that bypassed speech entirely. Overwhelmed but fascinated, Izuku pushed back a feeling of his own, a simple, gentle wave of greeting. Hello? Friend. Not a threat. The fish seemed to react. It nudged the viewport gently, then did a small, joyful loop before swimming alongside the skiff, its initial caution replaced by a playful familiarity. A few more fish from its school, sensing the lack of danger, swam closer, their collective curiosity a soft, pleasant hum in the back of Izuku's mind. What did you just do? Mara's voice cut through his reverie. He looked over to see her staring at him, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. I don't know, Izuku stammered. I just felt what it was feeling. So I felt back? You spoke to it, Mara said, her voice low. The legends say King Atlan could command all life in the sea. That the ocean itself would bend to his will. We thought it a myth, a king's boast. Royal family members have a connection. We can influence creatures, push them with our will. But what you just did, that was a conversation. It was gentle. Empathetic. She looked from him to the fish outside, and then back again. That is not a power of kings. That is something else. Before Izuku could begin to analyze what that meant, a proximity alert chimed softly. On the crystalline display, several red markers appeared, closing on their position at an incredible speed. ORM's patrols, Mara said, her posture instantly tensing. They must have tracked our energy signature when we dived. Hold on. The skiff surged forward, the low hum rising to a high-pitched whine. The peaceful underwater tour was over. Izuku stumbled and fell into the pilot's seat next to Mara as she expertly weaved the skiff through a field of towering underwater rock spires. Behind them, he could see their pursuers, three smaller, more aggressive-looking vessels shaped like predatory sharks, glowing with the same menacing red energy as the commando's armor. They're faster than we are, Mara gritted out, her knuckles white on the controls. And this skiff is a transport, not a warship. Bolts of superheated plasma shot past their viewport, boiling the water around them and sending shockwaves shuddering through their vessel. An alarm blared as one of the shots grazed their stern. Our aft propulsion is damaged. We're losing speed. Izuku's mind was racing. He was no pilot, no warrior. But he was an analyst. He looked at the display, which showed a 3D topographical map of the seafloor ahead. He saw their trajectory, the paths of the pursuers, and a dense, chaotic cluster of shapes directly in their path. What's that? He asked, pointing a shaking finger. Mara glanced at it. The graveyard of rust. A place where the surface world has been sinking its metal ships for centuries. It's a treacherous, unstable maze. To go in there is suicide. It's also our only chance, Izuku said, the muttering, analytical part of his brain taking over. Their ships are built for open water pursuit. They're fast, but their turning radius will be wider than ours. The graveyard is full of tight corners and obstacles. We can use that. And the sheer amount of metal might interfere with their sensors. Mara looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. You want me to fly into a death trap on the advice of a boy who learned to breathe water 5 minutes ago? Do you have a better idea? He shot back, his voice filled with a desperate certainty. They're gaining on us. Another plasma bolt hit them, this one harder. The lights inside the skiff flickered, and the vessel listed heavily to one side. Mara cursed, a sharp, guttural Atlantean oath. Fine. But if you get us killed, I will find a way to reanimate your corpse just to kill you again. She banked the skiff hard, diving towards the dark, jagged mass on the seafloor. They entered the graveyard of rust, and the world outside became a claustrophobic nightmare of corroded metal and shattered hulls. The hulks of ancient warships from forgotten conflicts rested beside modern cargo containers and the skeletal remains of old wooden galleons. It was a monument to the surface world's history, sunk and forgotten. "They're following us in!" Mara yelled, expertly navigating the skiff through the rusted ribcage of a massive oil tanker. "They're staying in formation, trying to flank us," Izuku observed, his eyes darting between the viewport and the tactical display. He felt a sudden spike of predatory intent from his right. "They're sending one around that destroyer." "Bank left." "Now!" Mara reacted instantly, wrenching the controls. A plasma blast seared the spot they had been a second before. She shot him a stunned, questioning look. "I can feel them," Izuku explained, his hand pressed against the viewport. The fish had fled, but other, smaller creatures, crabs, eels, bottom feeders, were still present, and their collective fear was a living map of the enemy's movements. "Their approach is scaring the wildlife. It's like a proximity alarm." He was no longer just a passenger. He was the navigator, the ship's early warning system. "Ahead, on the right," he said, pointing. "That's a World War II-era cruiser. See how it's leaning against that rock face? The hull integrity is compromised. It's rusted through. If we can trigger a collapse..." "How?" Mara demanded, dodging a falling piece of debris. "The torpedo tubes!" Izuku yelled, a spark of manic inspiration in his eyes. "They're probably still armed. The warheads won't be active, but the propellant might be, if you can hit that spot with a focused burst of hydrokinetic energy." It was a crazy, desperate gamble based on 100 hours of watching historical war documentaries. Mara didn't hesitate. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. She took one hand off the controls, aiming it at the decaying warship. "Give me a clear shot!" She swerved the skiff, presenting its side to the cruiser. For a heart-stopping second, they were a sitting duck. A pursuer's ship, seeing its chance, fired a plasma bolt. "Now!" Izuku screamed. Mara thrust her palm forward. A lance of clear, compressed water, invisible save for the distortion it created, shot from her hand. It moved with impossible speed, striking the rusted torpedo tube just as the enemy plasma bolt was about to hit them. The impact of Mara's attack, combined with the heat from the near-miss plasma bolt, was enough. A violent chemical reaction ignited the decades-old propellant. There was a low, guttural whump, and the side of the ancient cruiser blew outwards. The massive, multi-ton warship groaned, its rusted frame giving way, and it began to collapse, sliding off the rock face in a slow-motion avalanche of corroded steel. Mara threw the skiff into a sharp dive, pulling up just in time to avoid being crushed. Behind them, the cruiser slammed down onto the seafloor, kicking up a massive cloud of silt and debris and completely blocking the passage. One of the pursuing ships, unable to stop in time, was caught in the collapse, crushed under tons of rusted metal. The other two skidded to a halt, their path blocked. They had done it. The skiff coasted out of the graveyard into a relatively clear, deep basin. Mara brought the vessel to a gentle stop, resting it on a sandy patch of seafloor next to a vibrant coral reef. The silence inside was broken only by their ragged breathing. Mara turned to look at him. The exasperation and condescension were gone, replaced by a profound, grudging respect. "How did you know that would work?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I didn't, not for sure," Izuku admitted, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving him trembling. "It was just a theory, based on surface world technology. I watch a lot of documentaries." She stared at him for a long moment. "You do not fight like an Atlantean. You do not think like one. You analyze. You observe. You use your enemy's environment, their own history, against them." She shook her head slowly. "It is a strange and unexpected kind of strength. It's all I've ever had," Izuku said, thinking of his notebooks, of years spent on the sidelines, watching and learning because he could not participate. "Perhaps," Mara conceded, "it will be enough." She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "The skiff is too damaged to reach Atlantis directly. ORM will have patrols everywhere now. We must abandon it, and proceed to the rendezvous on our own. It's not far." They exited the crippled vessel, leaving it to be slowly reclaimed by the sea. For the first time, Izuku stood on the ocean floor. The pressure was a constant, heavy presence, like wearing a suit of armor made of lead. His movements were slow, clumsy. Mera, by contrast, moved with the effortless grace of a dancer, the water parting before her. "Your movements are inefficient," she observed, watching him flail. "You fight the water. You must learn to become a part of it." She beckoned him closer. "The power you have, this hydrokinesis, it is wild. Uncontrolled. You are like a child with a plasma cannon. You must learn control." She held up her hand, and the water around it began to swirl, forming a small, perfect whirlpool in her palm. "It is not about brute force. It is about will. The ocean has a current, a rhythm. You must feel it, listen to it, and then guide it. Gently." Izuku held up his own hand, trying to emulate her. He concentrated, trying to summon the feeling he'd had in the apartment, in the alley. A faint, pathetic swirl of water formed around his fingers before dissipating. He gritted his teeth, frustrated. "Patience," Mera said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. It was the first time he had seen her look anything other than severe. "It will take time. For now, just follow me. And try not to kick up too much silt. You look like a frightened squid." They traveled for what felt like hours, swimming through canyons carved by ancient currents, and over plains of waving seagrass. Izuku's awe slowly returned, tempered now by a growing sense of unease. This beautiful, vibrant world was on the brink of a devastating war. The people here, his people, were being rallied to hate his other home. Finally, Mera led him to a sheer, towering cliff face, covered in bioluminescent coral that cast a soft, ethereal glow. She swam to a specific formation of rock that looked no different from the rest, and pressed her palm against it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low grinding sound, a section of the cliff face slid away, revealing a dark, hidden entrance. "Volko's outpost," she explained. "He is, or was, ORM's chief advisor, but his loyalty was always to your mother, and to the dream of peace she shared with your father. He has been my ally in secret. He is the one who trained me. And he will be the one to train you." They swam inside, into a long tunnel that sloped gently upwards. The water level gradually lowered until they emerged into a massive, air-filled cavern. The air was cool and damp, and the only light came from glowing crystals embedded in the walls. The cavern was a combination of natural formations and ancient, carved structures. It looked like a hidden library, a secret armory, and a forgotten temple all rolled into one. Standing in the center of the chamber, illuminated by the soft crystal light, was a man. He was older, with silver hair tied back from a face lined with care and battle. He wore the formal robes of an Atlantean counselor over a practical warrior's armor. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, the eyes of a man who had seen too many wars and read too many books. He held a simple, elegant trident in one hand, and his posture was one of coiled, patient energy. This was Nudis Volko. He had been waiting for them. His eyes passed over Mera with a brief, warm nod of greeting, and then settled on Izuku. He took in the sight before him, a boy barely a man, who was several inches shorter than the average Atlantean. He was skinny, all sharp angles and lean muscle that spoke of a life without the ocean's pressure to strengthen him. His hair was an untamable green mess, and his eyes, wide and green, were filled not with royal authority or a warrior's fire, but with a nervous intelligence, a deep-seated weariness, and a universe of fear. He was shivering, drenched, and clutched a waterlogged, ruined notebook to his chest as if it were a shield. Volko had staked everything on this boy, his position, his honor, his life, and the fate of two worlds. He had prayed for the return of a prince, a savior, the heir of King Atlan. He looked at the small, trembling child who stood dripping on the floor of his ancient sanctuary, and for the first time in his long, storied life, Volko felt the cold, sharp sting of true despair. His face, a carefully constructed mask of calm resolve, betrayed him. His expression tightened, his brow furrowed, and a look of deep, profound concern settled in his eyes. This was not the weapon he needed to stop a war. This was just a boy. And they were all doomed. The silence in Volko's cavern was heavier than the ocean that pressed down from above. It was a silence filled with the weight of unspoken expectations and the crushing reality of what stood before them. Izuku shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the squelch of his soaked sneakers echoing in the vast, crystalline space. He felt Volko's gaze on him, a piercing, analytical stare that seemed to strip away his very skin and catalog the litany of inadequacies beneath. His small stature, his lack of muscle, the frantic, nervous energy that radiated from him in palpable waves. It was a look he knew all too well. It was the doctor's look of pity, the teacher's look of dismissal, Bakugo's look of contempt. It was the look the world gave to the powerless. So, Volko finally said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to carry the authority of ages. This is the one. The lost son of Atlanta. There was no warmth in his tone, no joyous welcome for a long-lost prince. It was the flat, dispassionate assessment of a general inspecting a new, deeply flawed weapon. Mera stepped forward, her regal bearing unwavering. His name is Izuku. He guided us through the graveyard of rust and disabled ORM's pursuit. His instincts are unconventional, but sharp. She was defending him, Izuku realized with a jolt of surprise. It was a sterile, tactical defense, but a defense nonetheless. Volko's eyes flickered to Mera, a silent conversation passing between the two old allies. Then his gaze returned to Izuku. Instincts will not win a duel in the ring of fire, nor will they sway the Council of Kings. ORM is a warrior, bred and trained for combat since he could hold a trident. He is a politician who has spent a decade consolidating his power. What are you? The question was a spear, aimed directly at the heart of Izuku's deepest insecurities. What are you? A quirkless wannabe. A failed hero. A scared kid who was so far out of his depth he was practically in another dimension. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, he clutched his ruined notebook tighter, the pulpy, waterlogged pages a sad testament to a life that had been blown apart just hours ago. Seeing his struggle, Volko let out a long, weary sigh. Come. There is much you must understand, and little time to learn it. He turned and walked deeper into the cavern, his robes sweeping across the stone floor. The space opened up into a massive, circular chamber that was breathtaking in its scope. The walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the rock, holding thousands of scrolls, crystalline data codexes, and bound volumes that seemed to hum with latent energy. In the center of the room, a large stone table was covered in what looked like a holographic map of the ocean floor, glowing with a soft blue light. This was not just an outpost, it was a library of forbidden knowledge, a war room for a rebellion that did not yet exist. This is the heart of my sanctuary, Volko said, gesturing to the collection. Histories that ORM has tried to erase. Truths he would see buried in the silt. He walked to one of the shelves and retrieved a heavy, ornate codex bound in what looked like petrified coral. He placed it on the central table. Your mother, Queen Atlanta, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a historian, a storyteller. She was more than a queen. She was a scholar, a diplomat. She saw the path Atlantis was on, a path of isolation, of festering resentment towards the surface. She believed that our future was not in hiding from your world, but in guiding it, in forging a partnership. She saw the potential for a union, a world where sea and land lived in balance. He tapped the codex, and a holographic image shimmered to life above it. It was a portrait of a woman with Izuku's green eyes and a gentle, determined smile. Queen Atlanta. She was beautiful, and the strength in her gaze was something Izuku recognized, a distant echo he felt within himself. But many, including her betrothed, the previous King Orvax, saw this as weakness. They saw the surface as a blight, a contamination. When they learned she had borne a child with a surface dweller, a half-breed heir, their fury was absolute. Orvax, in his rage, chose a traditional, brutal punishment. She was to be sacrificed to the creatures of the trench. An image flickered into view, a dark, terrifying abyss, swarming with monstrous, fanged creatures. Izuku flinched, a cold dread seeping into his bones. She faced her fate with a queen's courage, Volko continued, his voice tight with old grief. And with her apparent death, her dream of peace died as well. Orvax's son, ORM, was raised on a diet of his father's hatred, taught to see the surface world as a disease that must be purged. I was his mentor, tasked with his education. I taught him history, strategy, combat. I tried to instill in him some of his mother's wisdom, her compassion. But the poison of his father's legacy ran too deep. Volko's face was a mask of regret. I have failed him. And now, he uses the lessons I taught him to plan your world's destruction. The weight of the history was immense, a physical pressure on Izuku's shoulders. This wasn't just a simple power struggle. It was a tragedy, generations in the making. There is only one thing that can stop him now, Mara said, stepping forward. Her voice was firm, resolute. A symbol. Something more powerful than ORM's army, more persuasive than his rhetoric. Volko nodded grimly. He gestured to the holographic map on the table. With a touch, he zoomed in on a location deep within a treacherous, uncharted trench. King Atlan? The first and greatest ruler of Atlantis, the man who united the tribes after our continent sank beneath the waves. It was his genius that allowed our people to survive, to thrive in the depths. He forged a weapon from a rare Poseidon steel, a tool of immense power, the Trident of Atlan. A new image appeared, floating in the air, a magnificent trident with 3 long, elegant tines, glowing with an internal, golden light. It was a thing of mythic beauty and terrifying power. The trident granted him control over the 7 seas, Volko explained, his voice filled with the scholar's reverence. It allowed him to command the tides, to communicate with all sea life. But with great power came great hubris. He sought to extend his rule over the surface, to become master of the entire planet. The very power of the trident, mishandled, became his undoing. It overloaded, triggering a cataclysm that shattered his kingdom and sent him into a self-imposed exile. He and the trident were lost to history. The legend says, Mara added, that the trident can only be wielded by the true heir. That it lies in a hidden place, protected by an ancient guardian, awaiting the one who is worthy. ORM has been searching for it for years, Volko said. He believes that with the trident in his hand, his claim to the title of Ocean Master will be absolute, and the remaining kingdoms will have no choice but to bow to his will. But he cannot find it. He is not the true heir. You are Izuku. Izuku stared at the glowing image of the trident, his heart pounding. So, you want me to find a magic fork, guarded by a monster, to prove I'm a king I don't want to be, to fight a brother I never knew I had? The absurdity of it all came rushing back, a tidal wave of sheer impossibility. Precisely, Volko said, without a trace of irony. He walked over to an armor stand and took down a weapon. It was not the magnificent trident of Atlan, but a smaller, more practical 5-pronged weapon, a quindent. It was made of the same silvery Atlantean steel, its tines wickedly sharp. It was the weapon Queen Atlanta had once wielded, the one Mara had used to save him. This was your mother's, Volko said, holding it out to him. It will serve you until you find the trident. But a weapon is useless if you do not know how to wield it. Mara has told me you are untrained. That changes now. The training was brutal. Izuku had always known he was physically weak. Compared to Bakugo's explosive power or Kirishima's hardened skin, his body was a fragile, unremarkable thing. But he had never truly understood the depths of his weakness until he tried to fight like an Atlantean. The cavern had a designated training area, a wide, flat circle of stone. Volko, despite his age, moved with a lethal grace and speed that was utterly terrifying. His every movement was economical, precise, and backed by the dense, powerful musculature of a being who had spent his entire life living under the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. Again, Volko commanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He gripped the quindent, which felt impossibly heavy and awkward in his hands. He charged, trying to mimic the stance Volko had shown him, a low, fluid posture designed for underwater combat. On land, in the thin air, he just felt clumsy. Volko didn't even move. He simply shifted his weight, and as Izuku lunged, he used the haft of his own trident to trip Izuku's feet. Izuku went sprawling, landing hard on the stone floor with a painful grunt. The quindent skittered away from his grasp. You are fighting like a surface dweller, Volko criticized, his tone sharp. You rely on forward momentum. You put your weight into your charge. In the water, that is suicide. The currents will throw you off balance. You will be a leaf in a whirlpool. You must learn to find your center, to be the rock that the currents break against. I am trying, Izuku gasped, pushing himself up. His arms shook with exhaustion. Trying is not enough, Volko retorted. ORM will not be trying to kill you. He will simply do it. For hours they sparred. Or rather, Volko taught and Izuku failed. He was too slow, too weak, too uncoordinated. Every parry was a clumsy block that sent painful vibrations up his arms. Every thrust was easily deflected. He was disarmed a dozen times, tripped 24 more, and knocked flat on his back more times than he could count. Mara watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Izuku could feel her judgment, and it was almost as painful as Volko's trident striking his ribs. He was a disappointment, a frail, pathetic hope. Finally, after one particularly jarring fall, Izuku didn't get up. He just lay there on the cold stone, panting, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth from where he'd bitten his tongue. I can't, he whispered, the words ragged. I can't do this. I'm not a fighter. I'm not a king. Get up, Volko said, his voice cold. Why? Izuku cried, slamming a fist against the floor. So you can knock me down again? So you can prove what we all already know. That I'm not him? That I'm not what you need. I am not trying to turn you into ORM, Volko said, his voice suddenly quiet, but no less intense. I am trying to teach you how to survive him. Now get up. No. Volko was silent for a moment. Then, he did something unexpected. He walked over and sat down on the stone floor a few feet from Izuku. When I was a boy, he said, staring at the glowing crystals on the cavern ceiling, I read a story from the ancient archives. It was about King Atlan's court strategist. He was no warrior. He was a small man, a scholar. When a rival kingdom sent their champion, a giant of a man who had never been defeated, to challenge Atlan in single combat, everyone expected Atlan to fight, but the strategist advised against it. He spent a week doing nothing but observing the champion. He watched how he walked, how he ate, how he trained. He noted that the champion always favored his right side. He noted a slight hesitation before he launched his strongest attack. He noted that the champion's arrogance made him predictable. Volko looked down at Izuku. The strategist, who had never wielded a spear in his life, went out to face the champion himself. He did not try to match the champion's strength. He simply moved. He dodged. He anticipated. He used the champion's own weight and momentum against him. He exhausted the giant, frustrating him, making him angry and sloppy, and when the moment was right, when the giant was off balance and gasping for breath, the small scholar picked up a single stone and struck the giant in a precise spot on his temple. The champion fell, defeated by a man who won not with his arm, but with his mind. Izuku stared at him, listening intently. You have been trying to fight me, Volko said, standing up and offering a hand to Izuku. Stop trying to fight me. Start observing me. Izuku took his hand and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. He looked at Volko, not as an opponent, but as a problem to be solved. A puzzle to be analyzed. Again, Volko commanded, taking his stance. This time, Izuku didn't charge. He circled, his eyes wide, his mind a flurry of activity. He watched Volko's feet, the way his weight was distributed. He noted the slight tensing in his shoulders before a thrust, the way his trident was always angled to protect his left side. He remembered every move Volko had used against him, every feint, every parry. He wasn't just seeing a warrior anymore. He was seeing a data set, a pattern of movements. He saw an opening. A tiny, fractional one. Instead of a clumsy, powerful lunge, he made a quick, short jab aimed at Volko's exposed wrist. It was still too slow. Volko easily deflected it, but for the first time, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Better, Volko grunted. They continued. Izuku didn't win a single exchange. He was still disarmed, still knocked down. But the nature of the fight had changed. He started to last longer. He began to anticipate Volko's moves, using the Quinden not to attack, but to deflect, to redirect, to create space. He used his small size to his advantage, ducking under swings that would have decapitated a taller man. He was no longer trying to be a warrior. He was being an analyst, Hours bled into what felt like days. He ate strange, gelatinous nutrient packs that tasted of salt and algae. He drank purified water that Mara conjured from the air. He slept in short, exhausted bursts in a small alcove, his dreams filled with the clash of tridents and the whispers of the deep. Between his brutal training sessions with Vulko, he devoured the knowledge in the library. He wasn't just reading, he was inhaling information. He studied the political structures of the Seven Kingdoms, the artistic fishermen, the brutish brine, the philosophical trench dwellers, before their devolution, the isolationist deserters, and the lost veil. He memorized lineages, treaties, and ancient grievances. He studied King Atlan's battle tactics, analyzing his strategies, finding flaws and strokes of genius in equal measure. He connected with Vulko not as a pupil to a master, but as one scholar to another. They would argue late into the night about the interpretation of a historical text or the strategic implications of a famous naval battle from centuries ago. Vulko, who had spent decades alone with his books, found a surprising intellectual equal in this strange surface boy. "You absorb information like a sea sponge," Vulko remarked one evening, watching Izuku cross-reference 3 different crystalline codexes at once, muttering to himself about supply chain vulnerabilities in the Brine Kingdom. "You have the mind of a royal scholar." "It's all I've ever been able to do," Izuku replied, not looking up. "Just watch and think." His relationship with Mara was more complex. She remained distant, observing his training with a critical eye. But her hostility had faded, replaced by a grudging, reluctant curiosity. One evening, as he was practicing his hydrokinesis, still only managing to create wobbling, unstable blobs of water, she approached him. "You're forcing it," she said, her voice soft. "You think of it as a tool. A weapon. Something to be commanded, isn't it?" he asked, letting his blob of water collapse with a sigh. "No," she said. She held out her hand, and a perfect, intricate sphere of water formed, with smaller spheres orbiting it like a tiny solar system. "It is a part of you. Just as it is a part of me. It is the blood of our ancestors, the water in our veins. Do not command it. Listen to it. Feel its ebb and its flow. Coax it. Guide it." She looked at him, her aquamarine eyes searching his. "You told me you don't want to be a king. That you want to save people. I thought it was weakness, but watching you, your mind, your empathy, it is a different kind of strength. One that Atlantis has never had in a ruler. Perhaps your mother's dream was not so foolish after all." It was the closest she had come to an apology, to an admission that she might have been wrong about him. And it meant more to Izuku than any victory in the training ring. Their brief respite was shattered by the blare of a proximity alarm, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the cavern. Vulko and Mara were instantly on high alert, weapons in hand. A red light flashed on the central map table. "It's ORM," Vulko said, his voice grim. "He's found us. Someone must have talked." "How is that possible?" Mara demanded. "It doesn't matter," Vulko said, striding towards a hidden passage. "He has brought a legion with him. The entire outpost is surrounded. We cannot fight our way out." Panic seized Izuku. Trapped. Like a fish in a barrel. "The escape tunnel," Vulko said, pointing Mara towards the passage. "It leads to an old volcanic tube that will take you miles from here. I have stored supplies for your journey. The codex with the first clue to Atlan's resting place is in that pack." Mara looked at him, horrified. "You're not coming with us." "I am ORM's mentor," Vulko said, his face set like stone. "And his most trusted advisor. If I disappear with you, he will know I am a traitor and will hunt you to the ends of the earth. But if I am captured here, I can feign ignorance. I can delay him. I can feed him misinformation. I will buy you the time you need." "He'll kill you!" Mara protested. "It is a risk I am willing to take," Vulko said. He turned to Izuku and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "I have taught you what I can in the time we had. The rest is up to you. Remember the lessons of the scholar. Your mind is your sharpest weapon. Do not let your fear dull its edge." He then pressed a small, crystalline shard into Izuku's hand. "This contains everything from my library. Do not lose it." The sound of massive drills began to vibrate through the cavern walls as ORM's forces began to bore their way in. "Go! Now!" Vulko commanded. For Atlantis. Mera hesitated for a second longer, her face a storm of conflict. Then, she grabbed Izuku's arm, her grip like steel, and pulled him towards the escape tunnel. Vulko! Izuku cried out, looking back at the old warrior who stood alone, trident in hand, ready to face an army. Vulko did not look back. He simply stood, a solitary rock against the coming tide, a king's mentor preparing to make a king's sacrifice. Mera shoved Izuku into the dark, narrow tunnel. Don't look back, she ordered, her voice thick with emotion. We cannot let his sacrifice be in vain. They plunged into the darkness, the sounds of the drills and the impending battle fading behind them, leaving only the rushing water and the heavy, terrible burden of the quest that lay ahead. The escape tunnel was a claustrophobic, churning tube of black water. It was an ancient lava tube, repurposed by Vulko for this very contingency, and it felt like being swallowed by the planet. The current was strong, pulling them through the absolute darkness at a dizzying speed. There were no glowing crystals here, no bioluminescent life. It was a place of pure, primal dark, a sensory deprivation chamber that left Izuku with nothing but the rush of water in his ears and the frantic, terrified thumping of his own heart. He held the quindent in a death grip, the weapon a cold, solid anchor in the disorienting chaos. Mera was just ahead of him, a barely visible silhouette, her crimson hair a faint smudge against the black. They were both running on adrenaline and the grim knowledge of Vulko's sacrifice. Every second they put between themselves and the outpost was a second Vulko had bought for them with his life. The thought was a stone in Izuku's gut. Another person, another casualty in a war he had only just learned existed. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to widen, and the relentless current slackened. A faint, ghostly blue light began to permeate the water from ahead. They emerged from the lava tube into a vast, open expanse, a breathtaking and terrifying panorama of the deep ocean. They were perched on the edge of a colossal underwater canyon, a wound in the seafloor so deep and wide that the opposite side was lost in the hazy, blue-black distance. This was no ordinary canyon. It was the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of the world, a place the Atlanteans simply called the Pit. This is it, Mera said, her voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the profound silence. She pointed to a small, glowing data puck she held in her hand, on which Vulko's first clue was displayed. It was a series of ancient Atlantean glyphs. Izuku, his mind latching onto the familiar comfort of a puzzle, swam closer. The desert refers to the kingdom of the deserters in the Sahara, he began, translating the glyphs with the knowledge he'd absorbed from Vulko's library. But the kingdom collapsed. It's now a necropolis, the clue says. Follow the setting sun to the bottom of the world, where the fallen king's whisper echoes. The fallen king is Atlan, Mera stated. And the bottom of the world can only mean the trench. But it's a dead end, Izuku argued, gesturing to the endless, dark void before them. There's nothing down there. Vulko's own text said that no one who enters the kingdom of the trench ever returns. No Atlantean, Mera corrected, her expression grim. The creatures of the trench, they devolved. Cut off from the light, from the rest of the world, they became something else. Something hungry. The kingdom is still there, but it is no longer a kingdom of people. It is a hive of monsters. And ORM's forces will not dare to follow us down there. Vulko chose this path for a reason. It is the only place ORM cannot touch us. The logic was sound, and utterly terrifying. They were going to voluntarily swim into a place that was the boogeyman story of the underwater world. A place of certain death. What about the whisper? Izuku asked, his throat dry. I do not know, Mera admitted. But our path is clear. We go down. The descent was a journey into hell. The faint, ambient sunlight that penetrated the upper layers of the ocean quickly vanished. The world of blue and silver was replaced by an absolute, inky blackness. The pressure, which had already been immense, now became a tangible, malevolent force. Izuku felt it in his bones, in his sinuses, in the very cells of his body. It was a constant, crushing embrace that threatened to implode him. His Atlantean physiology was the only thing keeping him from being turned into paste. Mera produced 2 glowing light sticks from her pack, their chemical blue radiance cutting feeble cones into the oppressive dark. All they illuminated was the endless fall of marine snow, the slow, silent drift of organic detritus from the world above, a constant funeral procession into the abyss. The silence was the worst part. It was a deep, profound quiet that was more deafening than any noise. Izuku could hear his own blood pounding in his ears, the soft hiss of water, as he breathed. It was the silence of a tomb. And then, it wasn't. It started as a faint clicking, a chittering sound from the darkness beyond their lights. It was sporadic at first, then more frequent. It sounded like a million tiny pebbles being clicked together. "What is that?" Izuku whispered, his voice sounding small and fragile in the vastness. "They know we are here," Mera said, her hand tightening on her mother's quindent. "Stay close." A shape darted through the edge of her light cone. It was a blur of pale, translucent flesh and too many limbs. Then another. And another. They were fast, moving with an unnatural, jerky speed. "Hold your position," Mera commanded, her body a coiled spring of readiness. "They are scavengers. They hunt by sound and blood. If we remain calm and steady, they may pass us by." Izuku tried to control his breathing, to still the frantic jackhammering of his heart. But the clicking grew louder, closer. It was coming from all directions now. From above, from below, from the sides. They were surrounded. He aimed his own light stick into the darkness, and his blood ran cold. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but twisted, nightmarish parodies of what they might once have been. Their skin was a sickly, corpse-white, stretched taut over skeletal frames. Their limbs were long and spindly, ending in wicked, needle-like claws. But their faces were the worst. They had no eyes, only smooth, blank skin where eyes should be. Their mouths were huge, gaping maws filled with rows of needle-sharp fangs, unhinging like a snake's. The trench. One of them, bolder than the rest, darted forward. It moved with a predator's horrifying grace, its claws extended. Mera was a flash of green and crimson. She met its charge, the quindent a silvery blur. She impaled the creature through its chest, and it let out a silent, gurgling scream, its fanged mouth snapping uselessly. But the moment the creature's luminescent green blood hit the water, the clicking erupted into a frenzied, chittering roar. The scent of blood had driven the swarm into a feeding frenzy. Suddenly, the darkness was alive. They poured in from all sides, a living avalanche of claws and teeth. "Fight!" Mera screamed, and the battle began. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle for survival. Mera was magnificent, a whirlwind of deadly grace. She spun and stabbed, parried and kicked, her quindent a blur of motion. She fought with the skill of a master warrior, each movement precise and lethal. For every creature she dispatched, 3 more took its place. Izuku was not magnificent. He was clumsy, terrified, and fighting on pure, unadulterated panic. Volko's training had been for single combat, for duels of honor. This was a maelstrom. He swung the heavy quindent wildly, more like a club than a spear. He managed to fend off a few, the sharp tines finding purchase in their pale flesh. But he was quickly being overwhelmed. One of the creatures latched onto his leg, its needle-like teeth sinking into his calf. He cried out in pain, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the water. He kicked frantically, trying to dislodge it, but another one clamped onto his arm, its claws tearing at his suit. He could feel the cold water seeping into the tear, the warmth of his own blood blooming around him. The scent of his blood drove them into an even greater frenzy. They swarmed him, a writhing mass of pale limbs and snapping jaws, dragging him down into the darkness, away from the small pool of Mera's light. He was going to die. Torn apart in the dark by monsters, a million miles from home. The irony was not lost on him. He had run from a villain made of sludge only to be consumed by a living tide of flesh. As the creature's teeth and claws tore at him, as the pressure and the pain began to overwhelm his senses, something inside him snapped. It was not a surge of strength, or a burst of heroic resolve. It was a desperate, primal scream from the deepest, most ancient part of his being. The part that had awakened in the alley. The part that was connected to the sea. He didn't just feel his own fear and pain. He felt theirs. He reached out with that strange sense, not with aggression, but with desperation. And he was flooded with their minds. It wasn't thought. It was pure, undiluted instinct. Hunger. Hunger. pain, blood, light, burn, hunger, feed, swarm. They were simple, primal creatures, driven by nothing more than the need to feed and survive, and through that chaotic chorus of hunger, he felt something else. A deeper, more resonant note. A single, unifying command that pulsed beneath their frenzy. It was a feeling of guidance, of a shepherd calling to a mindless flock. It was the whisper the clue had spoken of. It wasn't a sound. It was a telepathic beacon, an ancient summons drawing the creatures, and the trident, towards a single point. Come. Come to me. The king awaits. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The trench weren't just random monsters. They were guardians, unwitting, mindless guardians drawn by the power of the trident, swarming around it, protecting it from any who would dare approach. He also felt their deepest, most primal fear. It was a simple, absolute terror of bright, intense light. His light stick had been knocked from his hand, but Mara's still burned brightly a short distance away. He couldn't reach it. But he didn't need it. He remembered a demonstration from one of his favorite hero documentaries, on the hero Luminous, whose quirk allowed him to create flashes of blinding light. The principle was rapid energy conversion, an idea, insane and desperate, sparked in his mind. He focused, not on the creatures, but on the water around him. He felt the immense, crushing pressure of the abyss, the potential energy stored in every single molecule of H2O. With a final, desperate surge of will, he pulled. He didn't try to move the water, but to agitate it, to excite the molecules around him in a sudden, violent burst. He tried to replicate on a microscopic level what happened when lightning struck the ocean. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the water in a 5-foot radius around him erupted in a flash of brilliant, blue-white light. It was a silent, underwater explosion of pure luminescence, a miniature star being born and dying in an instant. The effect on the trench was immediate and absolute. They shrieked, a high-pitched, silent scream of agony, and recoiled from the light as if burned by acid. The creatures latched onto him, released their grip, scrambling to get away from the painful, searing brightness. The entire swarm convulsed, their mindless hunger momentarily overwhelmed by their primal fear. The sudden release sent Izuku tumbling through the water. He was bleeding from a dozen different wounds, his head spinning from the exertion. He saw Mara, her eyes wide with shock, fighting off the last few creatures near her. The swarm was in disarray, confused and agitated, their attack broken. She swam to him, grabbing his arm. "What did you do?" "They're afraid of the light," he gasped, his leg throbbing with pain. "But that's not all. They're being called. Something is pulling them, and us, deeper. We have to follow it." "Follow them?" Mara looked at the roiling mass of monsters, her expression one of disbelief. "Have you gone mad?" "It's the trident," Izuku insisted, a strange certainty in his voice. "I can feel it. It's whispering to them. It's the only way." Mara looked from Izuku's bleeding, determined face to the swirling swarm of abominations. Every instinct she had, every ounce of her training, screamed at her to flee. But she also saw the conviction in his eyes, the same strange, analytical certainty that had gotten them through the graveyard of rust. She had trusted his mind then. She had to trust this new, bizarre sense now. "All right," she said, her voice tight. "But if you're wrong, we die." "We die if we stay here," he countered. Holding their lightsticks before them like shields, they plunged deeper, following the swarm. It was the most terrifying experience of Izuku's life. They were swimming in the midst of a hurricane of monsters, close enough to see the ghastly details of their eyeless faces, close enough to smell the rot and brine that clung to them. But Izuku was no longer just a terrified boy. He was a beacon of calm in the storm. He focused on their primal minds, and instead of trying to fight them, he projected a feeling of non-aggression, of harmlessness. He sent out a simple, repeated mental signal, not food, not threat. Passing by. It was like trying to calm a pack of rabid wolves with a gentle song. It didn't stop them. Their hunger was too strong. But it created a subtle buffer, a zone of confusion around him and Mara. The creatures still snapped and lunged, but their attacks were less focused, more hesitant. They seemed confused by the strange, calm presence in the midst of their frenzy. Izuku was using his empathy as a shield, a concept so alien to Atlantean combat that Mera could only watch in stunned silence. He was also using his connection to them as a compass. The whisper from the trident grew stronger, clearer, a resonant hum that vibrated in his very soul. It guided them down, down, down into the deepest, blackest part of the trench. Suddenly, the ocean floor fell away completely. They were at the mouth of a massive, swirling vortex of water, a whirlpool that plunged into an abyss even darker than the one they were in. The entire swarm of the trench was being pulled into it, a river of monsters pouring into the maw of the unknown. A maelstrom! Mera yelled, the powerful currents tugging at them. It will tear us apart. No! Izuku shouted, pointing into the vortex. Don't you feel it? The whisper is coming from inside. This is the way. We have to let it take us. He didn't wait for her to agree. He let go of his resistance, and the current seized him, pulling him into the swirling chaos. For a terrifying moment, he saw Mera's horrified face as he was sucked away. Then, he saw her grit her teeth, her expression hardening with a desperate resolve, and she too let go, allowing the maelstrom to claim her. The world became a violent, tumbling blur of pressure and disorientation. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, his body stretched and twisted by the impossible forces of the vortex. He felt a moment of incredible, shearing pressure, as if he were being squeezed through the eye of a needle. And then, just as suddenly it was over, he was spat out into calm, warm water. He opened his eyes, and his breath caught in his throat. He was no longer in the cold, dark abyss. He was floating in a vast, subterranean sea, illuminated by a soft, golden light that emanated from the very water itself. Above him, instead of an ocean, was a ceiling of rock and glowing crystal that formed a breathtaking, artificial sky. He saw land. Islands with lush, prehistoric-looking flora, giant ferns, strange, glowing fungi, and trees that defied gravity. He saw waterfalls that cascaded from the crystal ceiling, their water shimmering with the same golden light. And in the distance, he saw strange, winged creatures, like pterodactyls from a forgotten age, soaring through the warm, humid air. They had passed through the trench, through the maelstrom, and emerged into a lost world. A hidden sea at the center of the earth. He saw Mera a short distance away, her expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. She was staring at the impossible landscape, her warrior's mind struggling to comprehend what her eyes were seeing. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted. They had survived the hive of monsters. They had survived the maelstrom. And they had followed the whisper to the end of the world. Izuku looked around at the primeval beauty, at the serene, golden waters. The whisper was still there, but it was no longer a distant call. It was close. It was a soft, welcoming hum that seemed to emanate from the largest of the islands. He had found the trident's resting place. And he had a terrifying feeling that the creatures of the trench had been the easy part. The true test, the trial of the fallen king, was yet to come.